I get way too sad when my GF gets sad because of me. Looking for advice on how to deal with these situations. My girlfriend and I have been together for 8 years, and soon, in the golden warmth of summer, we will stand side by side, exchanging vows that will bind us together in the presence of those who have watched our love story unfold. From the outside, our relationship appears seamless, effortless, even a perfect harmony that others admire, an ideal to which some aspire. Friends and family often comment on how we complement each other, how we radiate warmth when we are together, how our connection seems unshakable, like two halves of a whole finally reunited. And I agree. I feel profoundly fortunate to have found her, to have built something so deep, so unwavering, with a person who is not just my partner but my confidant, my greatest ally, my home. She loves to cook. Not just in the routine, sustenance-providing way, but with the kind of passion that makes her eyes gleam when she finds the perfect balance of flavors, the kind that transforms simple ingredients into something exquisite. She moves through the kitchen with precision and grace, as if orchestrating a symphony, each movement deliberate, each step infused with care. It's a talent I admire, but one I do not share. The kitchen, for me, is a place of obligation, not creation. I do my part in our home. I wash the dishes, I clean, I handle the laundry, and I take on other tasks as naturally as breathing. And yet, there is a rift hidden within this seemingly equitable division of labor, one that stems from something more profound than household chores. For her, love is not just something spoken, not just a feeling shared in quiet moments. Love is action. Love is effort. Love is the warmth of a home-cooked meal prepared by the person who cares about you the most. It is the time and energy invested in creating something not for oneself, but for another. And while I understand this, while I know how much it means to her, I cannot deny that cooking drains me. After a long day, the thought of preparing a meal fills me with exhaustion rather than joy. I do it, sometimes rarely, admittedly, but I do. I want to be better at this, for her, for us. In the past year, I can count on one hand the number of times I have cooked for her. 5 times in an entire year. It isn't enough. I know it isn't enough. But there is more to this than the act of cooking itself. She has always struggled with disappointment. Not in the way that most people do, not in a fleeting, momentary way that can be shaken off with a deep breath and a new distraction. For her, disappointment runs deeper, strikes harder, lingers longer. It is woven into her very being, an unwelcome but familiar shadow cast over her by years of childhood pain. Her mother complex, unpredictable, narcissistic in ways that left invisible scars shaped her into someone who feels emotions with an intensity that can be overwhelming. She was taught, in ways both direct and indirect, that love was conditional, that to be seen, to be cherished, meant meeting expectations. And when those expectations weren't met, the disappointment was sharp, cutting, unbearable. Now, even in adulthood, she carries that weight. When something she has hoped for, even something small, doesn't materialize, it isn't just an inconvenience. It is a crack in the foundation, a whisper of the past reminding her that love is fragile, that happiness can be taken away as easily as it is given. And while I understand this about her, while I want nothing more than to shield her from those echoes of hurt, I often find myself standing helplessly in the wake of her sadness, unsure of how to reach her in those moments. She feels everything deeply. Joy, sadness, frustration, love, they are all magnified, all-consuming. And when she is sad, truly sad, it is as if the world itself dims. I see it in her eyes, in the way her shoulders drop, in the way her breath catches ever so slightly as she tries to hold it all in. And when I see it, when I know that I am the cause, even in the smallest of ways, something within me shatters. It is not just guilt, it is something heavier, something suffocating. The idea that I, the person who loves her most, have been the source of her pain, however unintentional, is unbearable. This is where our struggle begins. She wants to be able to express her feelings, to be open about her sadness without fear, without hesitation. She wants to be seen, to be understood, to be comforted. But when she does, when her emotions spill over, I am not the rock I should be. Instead of steadying her, I crumble with her. I cannot hold her sadness without becoming consumed by it. And in that moment, it is no longer about her, no longer about what she needs. It becomes about me, about my inability to tolerate the weight of her emotions, about my desperation to make it all disappear, not for her sake, but for mine. I know this is wrong. I know this dynamic is unfair. She should not have to soften her sadness to protect me. She should not have to comfort me when she is the one hurting. And yet, again and again, this is how it unfolds. A cycle we cannot seem to break. A quiet, persistent problem that neither of us fully know how to solve. We are getting married soon. Our life together, the future we have dreamed of, is just beginning. And yet, I cannot shake the fear that this inability to hold her sadness without breaking under its weight, could become something that festers. I want to be stronger. I want to be the partner she deserves. But right now, I don't know how. The morning began like any other, the air thick with the quiet routine of our shared life. I had taken the day off, looking forward to a few hours of solitude at the gym, a cleansing sweat, and then the embrace of the sauna before I would have to rush to the train station. The trip to visit my parents and brother had been planned well in advance, and though my girlfriend was welcome to join, she had chosen to stay behind, opting for a weekend of rest, a break from the relentless stream of social obligations that had filled our recent weeks. It was a decision I understood, one that made perfect sense given how much she values the quiet sanctuary of her own space. Everything was in order. Everything was fine. Or so I thought. I was about to step out, my gym bag slung over my shoulder, when she spoke. It was a simple request, casual, almost offhand. Could I cook lunch today? I hesitated for just a moment before responding, my voice neutral, factual. My train leaves at 11:20. I really don't have time for that, sorry. And that was it. The shift happened in an instant, barely perceptible at first, but undeniable. Her face fell, and then, just as quickly, her eyes filled with unshed tears. A sharp pang of guilt flared in my chest as I watched the wave of disappointment crash over her, as real and raw as if I had physically let her down. I hesitated, then set my bag down and crawled back onto the bed beside her. My heart was already racing, my mind grasping for an immediate solution, anything that would undo the damage of the last few seconds. I asked her what was wrong, though I already knew. She had imagined something different. Had not realized how early I needed to leave. Had seen the rare opportunity me home, no work, no rush, and had gotten excited. Had envisioned something simple but meaningful, a meal, prepared by me, an act of love in its purest form. And now, that moment was slipping away before it had even begun. This is where I should have done better. I should have taken a deep breath, let the moment settle, reached out with understanding instead of panic. I should have reassured her, acknowledged her disappointment, given her space to feel what she was feeling instead of trying to fix it instantly. I should have asked if there was something else I could do, if I could pick up something special for her lunch, if I could find another way to show her she mattered to me. But that's not what happened. Instead, as her sadness took root, something inside me twisted violently. It was an immediate, visceral reaction, the all too familiar sensation of self-recrimination flooding through me like poison. I was the reason she was upset. I had failed her. I was a terrible partner. The thoughts came hard and fast, overwhelming in their weight. And before I could stop myself, I was already spiraling, already reacting in the worst possible way. The gym, the sauna, my carefully planned morning, it all fell away in an instant. None of it seemed to matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was making it right. I'll cook, I blurted out, the words tumbling out before I had even fully processed them. I'll come back right after the gym and make something. It was a desperate, clumsy offering, and I knew it before the words had fully settled between us. It didn't make sense. It wouldn't actually solve the problem. And worse, it was fueled not by genuine care, but by my own inability to sit with discomfort. She looked at me, and for a second, confusion flickered across her face. And then, gently but firmly, she shook her head. That's not what I want, she said, her voice quiet but sure. I don't want you to rush around and stress yourself out. Just go to the gym. I'll make something. But that only made it worse. Now, instead of feeling like I had disappointed her, I felt useless. I felt like I had put her in a position where she had to comfort me when I was supposed to be comforting her. I felt weak. And then, before I could stop it, I felt my own throat tighten, the prickle of tears I didn't want to acknowledge. She saw it immediately. Her sadness was still there, but now it was tangled with concern for me, and that made me feel even worse. The weight of the entire situation pressed down on me, the room suddenly too small, the morning unraveling into something I couldn't control. I didn't go to the gym. I couldn't. Instead, I stayed curled up beside her, both of us locked in this cycle that we had found ourselves in too many times before, her sadness turning into my guilt turning into my own sadness, until neither of us could remember how it had all started. By the time I finally pulled myself together enough to shower and pack, I was running late. My window of time had shrunk to nothing, and I had to rush out the door in a flurry of unfinished emotions, barely able to say goodbye properly. It wasn't until I was on the train, staring out at the passing scenery, that I had a moment to breathe, to think about what had actually happened. And I hated what I saw. I had turned her disappointment into my crisis. I had made her sadness about me. And worst of all, I had done the very thing I never wanted to do. I had made her feel like she couldn't express how she was feeling without it breaking me. I know this is a problem. I know it's something I need to work on. But in that moment, all I could do was sit there, watching the landscape blur past, wondering how many more times we would find ourselves trapped in the same pattern, wondering if I would ever figure out how to be the person she needed me to be. The moment her face fell, the moment I saw her eyes well up, something inside me collapsed. It was an automatic reaction, a chain of emotions so deeply embedded in me that I had no control over them. The sadness hit me like a tidal wave, swallowing me whole before I even had time to brace for impact. It wasn't just guilt, it was something much worse, something more consuming. A suffocating certainty that I had failed her, that I had let her down, that I was a terrible partner who couldn't even do this one small thing to make her happy. And once that thought took hold, there was no stopping it. I didn't think. I reacted. My perfectly planned morning vanished as if it had never existed. The gym, the sauna, the brief moment of self-care I had carved out for myself, it all became meaningless in the face of my overwhelming need to fix what I had broken. It didn't matter that my plan didn't make sense. It didn't matter that cooking in a rush wouldn't actually bring her the comfort she needed. It didn't matter that I was grasping at a solution that wasn't even a solution. The only thing that mattered was undoing the sadness I had caused, and if that meant scrambling to find a recipe and rearranging my entire morning, then so be it. I grabbed my phone, my fingers moving frantically as I scrolled through meal ideas, my mind racing through the logistics. If I left the gym exactly at this time, ran home, threw something together as fast as humanly possible, then showered, then packed, then sprinted to the station, I could make it work. It wouldn't be a good meal. It wouldn't be enjoyable. It wouldn't even be what she wanted, but at least I wouldn't have to sit with the crushing weight of knowing I had disappointed her. And then she spoke. "That's stupid," she said, her voice tinged with frustration but also something else, something tired, something sad in a way that had nothing to do with the lunch itself. "Just go to the gym. I'll cook in my lunch break." I froze. My entire, frantic solution unraveled in an instant. I should have felt relief after all. She had just given me permission to let go of the guilt that had been clawing at me. She had reassured me that it was fine, that I could go about my day without worrying about her. But instead of relief, a new wave of emotions crashed over me, and this time, it was something worse. Because suddenly, it wasn't just about her being sad anymore. Suddenly, it was about me. Her words, logical, reasonable, felt like rejection. Like she was telling me that my effort wasn't needed, that I was useless, that I had failed in a way that couldn't be undone. My desperate need to fix things, to make things right, had been thrown aside. She didn't need my rushed, half-baked solution. She would rather just handle it herself. And I couldn't handle that. The air between us grew heavier. The sadness that had already been weighing me down deepened into something closer to helplessness, an exhaustion so profound that it settled into my bones. My throat tightened, and before I could stop it, my eyes were burning. My face grew hot. I felt like a child, but I couldn't control it. I wasn't just upset, I was unraveling. And she saw it. She sighed, the frustration melting away as she realized what was happening. The shift was subtle but unmistakable, the way her expression softened, the way her body language changed from tense to concerned. She was still upset, I could tell, but now, instead of focusing on her own emotions, she was focusing on mine. And just like that, the entire dynamic shifted. The moment I should have been comforting her, she was comforting me. I hated it. I hated how easily I crumbled under the weight of my own emotions, how quickly the situation flipped so that she was the one soothing me, even though she had been the one who was disappointed to begin with. I hated that this kept happening, that I couldn't just absorb her sadness without making it my own. She reached for me, her hands gentle as she pulled me toward her. My body tensed at first, but then I gave in, letting my head rest against her shoulder as she ran her fingers through my hair. She whispered something soft, something meant to reassure me, to ground me. But I barely heard it over the sound of my own thoughts that told me I was weak, that I was making this harder than it needed to be, that I was once again proving that I wasn't the partner she deserved. Time stretched. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Long enough for the morning to slip away from me. Long enough for the minutes to disappear until I was suddenly, painfully aware of how little time I had left before my train. I had wasted too much of it. When I finally pulled away, my eyes were red, my body sluggish. The exhaustion wasn't just emotional anymore, it was physical, a full body drain that made even the simple act of moving feel difficult. I glanced at the clock and cursed under my breath. I needed to move. Everything after that was a blur of rushing, of frantic last-minute packing, of a shower that did little to clear my head. I barely had time to breathe before I was out the door, my heart still heavy, my mind still stuck in the loop of everything that had just happened. The train ride felt surreal, like I was watching my life from a distance rather than actually living it. I replayed the morning over and over, each detail twisting in my mind, each moment laced with regret. I knew, logically, that we had talked it out. That she wasn't angry. That we had ended on a note of understanding, or at least something close to it. But it didn't feel settled. It didn't feel like something that wouldn't happen again. Because it would. Because this wasn't the first time. Because I knew that as long as I kept reacting this way, as long as I kept absorbing her sadness like it was my own personal failure, we would always end up here locked in this cycle, stuck in this pattern, unable to break free from the roles we had unknowingly fallen into. And for the first time, as I stared out the window at the passing scenery, I wondered if I even knew how to change. The thoughts swirled in my mind long after I left for the weekend. The weight of the morning's events, the sadness I had felt, the way my body had physically reacted to my girlfriend's disappointment, it all lingered like an invisible force pressing against my chest. The rhythmic sound of the train moving along the tracks should have been calming, a chance to reset, to collect myself before seeing my family, but instead, it was an echo chamber of regret and confusion. I couldn't stop replaying everything, dissecting it, analyzing each moment, trying to pinpoint the exact reason why I had reacted the way I did. Why was it so unbearable to see her upset? Why did my brain seem to short-circuit the moment I perceived myself as the cause of her sadness? Why did I crumble into something helpless instead of being the steady, supportive presence she needed? These questions clawed at me, each one leading to a new realization that I wasn't sure I was ready to confront. I had always considered myself a rational person, someone who didn't get easily swept up in emotion. And yet, here I was completely at the mercy of my own feelings whenever my girlfriend was anything less than happy. It wasn't just that I hated to see her sad. It was that I couldn't endure it. The intensity of her disappointment felt like a personal failure, an indictment of my worth as a partner. And when that feeling took over, it didn't matter what was logical or reasonable, I became consumed with fixing it, even when fixing it wasn't what she needed. The worst part was knowing that my reaction had consequences beyond my own suffering. Because I couldn't hold space for her sadness without internalizing it as my own, she had learned to be careful around me, to minimize her feelings, to gauge whether her disappointment would be too much for me to handle. And that realization was like a knife to the gut. The very thing I wanted most, to be a safe place for her, to be the kind of partner who could support her through anything, was the thing I was failing to be. It was a slow erosion, one I hadn't noticed until now. I thought back to the past few months, to the moments where she had hesitated before voicing her frustration, to the way she sometimes brushed things off with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Had she been holding back because she knew I couldn't handle it? Had I unwittingly taught her that her sadness was something that had to be managed for my sake rather than something she was free to express? The train ride blurred into the background as my thoughts spiraled deeper, pulling me into a quiet panic. The guilt I felt wasn't just about the morning's events anymore, it was about all the times before this, all the ways in which my emotional fragility had forced her to tiptoe around me. And as much as I hated to admit it, I knew that wasn't fair to her. She deserved to feel however she felt, without the added burden of worrying about how I would react to her emotions. Was this emotional dependence? It felt like it. It felt like I had tethered my own emotional well-being so tightly to hers that any moment of unhappiness on her part sent me into a spiral. It wasn't a conscious choice, but it had become a pattern, an instinctive reaction I didn't know how to break. And if I didn't figure out how to stop it, I knew where it would lead: resentment, exhaustion, an imbalance in our relationship that neither of us wanted but that I was unknowingly creating. The worst part? I knew that she knew all of this too. That's why she had comforted me that morning. That's why she had so quickly let go of her own disappointment, because she had recognized, maybe even before I did, that I was spiraling. And rather than letting herself fully feel what she had been feeling, she had put her own emotions aside to soothe me instead. That wasn't what I wanted for her. That wasn't what she wanted for herself. By the time the train pulled into the station, my stomach was a knot of unresolved emotions. Seeing my parents and my brother was a welcome distraction, a temporary reprieve from the thoughts that had been consuming me all morning, but even as I sat at the dinner table, listening to the familiar rhythm of family conversation, I wasn't really there. I was still stuck in my head, trapped in the loop of my own self-reflection. I needed to talk about this. Really talk about it. Not just with my girlfriend, but with someone who could help me untangle why I was like this, why I had such an extreme reaction to her sadness, why I was so incapable of holding space for her emotions without drowning in them myself. Therapy had been a lifeline for me in the past. It had helped me crawl out of depression, helped me reclaim pieces of myself that I thought I had lost. But I had never really talked about this part of me, this deeply ingrained need to absorb and erase the sadness of the people I loved, no matter what it cost me. I had kept it compartmentalized, filed away as something separate from the struggles I had worked through before. But it wasn't separate, was it? It was all connected. The way I viewed myself, the way I reacted to perceived failure, the way I felt an unbearable pressure to be enough, it was all part of the same tangled mess. I didn't want to make my next group therapy session about my relationship. That wasn't why I had started going. But this wasn't just about my relationship, was it? It was about me. About the way I functioned. About something that had been shaping my interactions long before I had even met my girlfriend. So I would talk about it. I would bring it up. Maybe not as the center of the discussion, but as something I needed to understand, something I needed help with. Because I didn't want to keep doing this to her. I didn't want to keep doing this to myself. And maybe, just maybe, by acknowledging it, by putting words to something that had silently controlled me for so long, I could finally start to change. I had to. Because real love wasn't about fixing or absorbing or erasing. It was about being there, about supporting without suffocating, about allowing space for someone else's emotions without losing yourself in them. And if I wanted to be the partner she deserved, if I wanted to build a future with her that wasn't weighed down by this cycle, I had to figure out how to do that. Before it was too late.